Hello and welcome back to Challenge Poverty Week at shmu. This year, Challenge Poverty Week is running from the 6th of October to Sunday the 12th of October. It's an annual campaign and it was first launched by the Poverty Alliance in 2013, and the week is all about shining a light on poverty, inequality, while highlighting the urgent need for meaningful, long-term solutions to build a fairer Scotland for everyone. So shmu has been using our platforms to take part in Challenge Poverty Week for a number of years now, and this year we are once again joining hundreds of organisations across Scotland to raise a unified voice to demand change. So if you've been following our campaign across the week, you'll know we've been exploring a variety of themes. And today, for Friday the 10th, we're discussing warm homes, green travel and a safe climate. And I've just got the perfect guest for us today. So I'm joined today by Friends of the Earth Scotland's Just Transition organiser, Scott Herrett. So welcome, Scott. How are you today?
Hello. Yeah, I'm feeling great. It's a bit rainy outside, but I guess we need the water, so
definitely, yeah. After this summer, we'll be needing quite a bit of it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming in to chat to me today. So for anyone who isn't aware, could you maybe start by telling us a wee bit about Friends of the Earth Scotland and what your role as Just Transition organiser is?
Yeah, so Friends of the Earth Scotland is, I guess the sort of broadest way to describe it is an environmental charity, but we're also part of a global organisation under the sort of Friends of the Earth umbrella. So we have Friends of the Earth organisations in, I can't remember exactly how many countries, but basically around the world, and we are sort of connected, but like in the UK, there's Friends of the Earth Scotland, and obviously we focus our work on Scotland, and then you also have England, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. But in the work, what we do a lot on is around climate justice, which means addressing basically climate change, but doing it in a way that doesn't directly helps people who are directly affected by climate change foremost, and also like what we do instead, the thing we do instead actually benefits people as well. So, but then under that we have lots of different campaign focuses, which is basically trying to sort of move away from the reliance on fossil fuels, which obviously causes greenhouse gas emissions, which causes climate change. So we do a lot of campaigning around that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like you do a lot of different work, and I'm guessing that it feeds quite well into campaigns like Challenge Poverty, and today's theme of like greener travel and warmer homes is a massive crossover for you guys. So could you tell us a wee bit about why this theme of warm homes, green travel, safe climate is an essential part of Travel Poverty Week? And could you maybe explain a bit about the links between these issues and what we're trying to focus on?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge issue. It's a huge area, and it can be quite complex. I will try my hardest to sort of keep it as simple as possible, and sort of showing the links between climate change and the causes of climate change to issues around fuel poverty.
It's a massive issue.
Yeah, so in terms of like fuel poverty, the way I understand it, or the way it's categorised, is that I think currently is about a third of households in Scotland who are living in fuel poverty, which essentially means I think something like 20% of their sort of take-home income is spent on fuel bills. Which, if that's like a fifth of all the money that people or households get, is just purely on fuel bills, and that often is, as I understand it, often if somebody's living in fuel poverty or households living in fuel poverty, then they're also suffering other forms of poverty in terms of like transport policy, which means a high proportion of their income is spent on transport. So it's sort of connected in that way. And if you think about it, what that means is that there's lots of people who are just basically working to essentially survive, like the bare minimum,
Absolutely.
like food, transport, heating, and things like that, and which obviously is not great for lots of reasons. And so the way the way we see that, how that's connected to climate change, is that the main cause of climate change in the world is the burning of fossil fuels, particularly things like oil and gas. It was originally it was around coal, but like particularly in this country is the burning of oil and gas. And we use gas for lots of things, and predominantly use gas for heating, particularly homes. And so we're relying on this energy source, which can be very expensive, but is also contributing to climate change. And the other thing about gas is that I think it's like today the energy price cap is increased, and it's something which I'm sure listeners probably are hearing about and have heard about before. And it's like, why is that increasing? And the main reason is because essentially it's linked to global gas prices.
Okay.
And so global gas prices can fluctuate, and obviously depending on what happens around the world, they can go up. And so we're relying on this energy source like gas for heating our homes, which is very volatile. And I think it's not a very good way of heating our homes. But the thing is, there's lots of things we can do instead of that, and that's something which we really need to sort of focus on.
Yeah, I mean, well, when you consider the numbers, like as you say, about 1/3 of households in Scotland, that is terrifying numbers of people being in fuel poverty. So it just goes to show that that this is a really widespread issue, and that people are not going through this alone. So we need to think of better solutions to this. We can't just continue putting the burden of that on regular households. We need to ask for better. So when you say that you think that it's a bad way of heating our homes, what would the alternatives be in your mind?
Yeah, so I think for me that's the most sort of frustrating thing about it, is that we already have all the things there's already the technology exists, what we can do instead of using this sort of form of energy. So the first thing when it comes to homes, often I've talked about gas, which often is the energy source, and that can be the focus, but the first thing what we really need to do as a country is, and also in our community, is to basically make our homes a lot more energy efficient. And so the UK as a whole has some of the worst housing stock, historically worst housing stock for energy efficiency. That basically means is that any heat that what comes out of your radiators or whatever it is you heat your house with goes straight out into through the walls, and you lose that heat, and which means you have to keep the heating on all the time. And so the first thing what we would argue and what we're beginning to campaign on is this idea around retrofit. And so what retrofit means is essentially basically making your existing home more energy efficient. And so that's like things like having better insulation, having better windows, having less drafty doors, but then also interestingly it's having ventilation, because if you sort of create a sort of airtight box as a home, that doesn't allow moisture to come out, and then you get some people when you see retro, it's sort of, you sometimes see stories about mold growing and things like that, but often that's basically as a result of poor installation of retro. So that has to be the first thing, is you actually make homes more efficient, and I can talk a little bit how that happens. But then after that, we really need to electrify our heating system, and that electricity ideally needs to be produced by renewable energy, which is wind power, solar panel power, and things like that. And so that it means that electricity coming into the house is like green, so it doesn't cause greenhouse gas emissions in the same extent as, say, burning gas in a power station does. And then there's lots of different ways you can sort of heat your house using electricity, but one of the most popular and is increasing is this. You listeners might be heard of this thing called like air source heat pumps or heat pumps. And so I can remember when I first started learning about heat pumps at university, and it's it's an incredibly efficient way of actually heating a space, and it's run by electricity. So it's essentially a fridge in reverse. That's how it works. So so I won't go into the science of it, but it's really efficient way of heating. And so sometimes though, some listeners may think, well, actually I heat my house using electricity, and I might have like electric storage heaters, which is like quite an old technology, and it's notoriously expensive. And again, I won't go into the sort of the science behind it, but so that when I'm saying that we need to electrify the way we heat our houses, I'm not talking about storage heaters. I'm talking about heat pumps. So they're that's like the technology of retrofitting, if you like.
Absolutely. And I imagine there's lots of other ways of making our homes a bit more energy efficient as well, by like as you're saying, insulation, maybe solar paneling, that sort of thing. But how can we get that to people? How can we make that possible for the average person to be able to access that? Is there ways, is there schemes and stuff that people can go to? But also, how can we demand that this is much more accessible to the regular person?
Yeah, so that's always the difficult thing is the how. And so currently, when we think of retrofit and when you maybe hear about it, often a lot of it is around individual households doing it themselves. So there is sort of various, wouldn't be able to name, but there is various sort of grant schemes available. So if you're in a household which you can essentially afford to do it, then there is definitely like help out there to help households. But that is essentially the minority, and we're obviously talking about sort of challenge poverty. And so people living particularly in fuel poverty, and not just people living in fuel poverty, but I'd say most people would not have the resources, would not have the money to basically retrofit their homes, as I've described. And so this is where the sort of politics comes into it, and the sort of work that we try to do is to campaign. So there's actually a systemic way of doing this. So it needs to ultimately be led by the government, by the state. So there needs to be better government policies which actually make it easier to retrofit our homes en masse. So we're not just relying on individual householders to do it. That is not going to solve the problem. It has to be sustainable. Has to be on a basically a massive sort of countrywide scale, but actually having it place based in our communities. And so that's what we have to campaign for. And there's various things that people can do. I mean, if people want to join Friends of the Earth Scotland, then that would be great. Like, we're a member-led organisation, so but you don't have to be a member to sort of basically challenge your politicians to try to like get better policies in terms of or demand for sort of mass retrofit in Scotland.
Definitely. And is that something that you see us being able to achieve in Scotland if we're able to go forth with these campaigns? Do you have hope that we could get mass retrofitting and stuff done?
I mean, so the thing is, like, we have the technology to do it, so that we know how to do it, and then it comes to the whole thing about like who pays for it. That's always a big question. And so what I would say to that is that we have enough wealth in this country to basically pay for it. We have enough wealth in the world essentially to pay for it. So it's interesting, when I was like looking at the website of Challenge Poverty Week, I started thinking about maybe it should be Challenge the Super Rich week, because I think to address a lot of these, I'm sure like the different interviewers who come in will talk about different aspects of addressing poverty, but essentially I think that's all we need to do, all that and things like retrofit, which I've talked about, but we also need to address how wealth is distributed in Scotland and also in the wider UK, given obviously a lot of our powers are reserved to Westminster. And so I think we really have to have a serious conversation about how we do that, because we do need to find ways to like pay for these sort of schemes, not just retrofit, but how we can sort of improve public transport as well. And the fact that wealth inequality is actually growing in the UK since 1990, that needs to be addressed to basically help fund these sorts of schemes and projects.
So why is access to affordable green travel so vital for individuals and communities impacted by poverty? And what sort of investment is needed to make this possible?
Yeah, so just again bringing it back to the sort of, obviously as we campaign for climate justice, so how that again it's connected to addressing climate change is that I think there's lots of evidence to show that like mass transit systems, like trains, like regular buses, is the most efficient way for a society to move people around, and it's a lot more efficient than individual cars. So there really needs to be like greater investment and making our public transport basically a lot more affordable, and also a lot more like just a better service. So it actually, because currently the way I experience public transport in Scotland is that it is expensive, and also it doesn't necessarily run when I would like things to run.
Yeah.
And I think people in rural areas, that it's particularly bad in rural areas.
Certainly, and it seems to be not even just rural areas, but it seems to be very locality dependent on even in cities. Like I think we in Aberdeen seem to have it more expensive and maybe less readily available than other cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh. So if there's as much of a disparity between two cities, I can't imagine how much of an impact that would make on people in rural areas who maybe have very limited options.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when I first moved to Aberdeen, so I've lived in Aberdeen for about 10 years now, and so I lived in Edinburgh for 2 years. And I can remember coming up for a job interview and coming off the train and getting the bus from the station up to Craigiebuckler, and I didn't have any change. And I think I ended up paying like £3 for a single bus journey, and it was like maybe 5-10 minutes long. And I just couldn't believe it, because in Edinburgh at the time, I think it was like £1.70 and you could go anywhere. And so that was my first experience of buses in Aberdeen. So I think the whole journey cost me something like £5.50 or something like that, and that was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I can't imagine the price now.
Yeah, I can imagine it now. And so my understanding of why that is the difference. I mentioned Edinburgh. So in Edinburgh, like London as well, you've essentially got a publicly owned bus company, which means that the council have the biggest stake in that bus company. It's Lothian Buses. And what that basically means is that the bus company is run for the purposes of moving people around. That's predominantly the reason why it's run. Where in Aberdeen we have, I think we have like 2 bus companies, private companies, whose purpose is obviously moving people around, but also essentially their purpose is to make profit for their shareholders. And so it ultimately that is what we need to sort of when I'm talking about the sort of the affordability, there's a reason why buses are more expensive, and so And the thing as well is like what happens is with private bus companies, is that they will obviously there to make a profit, and so the least profitable routes, which often are in rural areas, they basically discontinue those services, and so they don't run, and so people suffer there. Where if you have a bus system which is run for like the people, essentially what you can do is you can essentially subsidize those. So if you have a very popular route which more than makes the money to cover its costs, you can use that excess to then provide services to run the less popular routes, but which are still needed by those people who live in those locations. And so again, that's just like one example of why we really have to have like if we want to address climate change, if we want to like have lower fares so people can move around. And I talk about lower fares, but in some countries they actually have free public transport, because they see that it actually pays for itself, because if people can move around a lot easier, then often that actually means the economy is more efficient and can operate a lot better. And so it does that in the end, it pays for itself. So I mean, I've been talking about buses, but the same logic applies to trains as well. It's exactly the same.
Definitely.
And more so in a way for trains, because the idea of private companies running trains, which is a rail network, is essentially you've just got one track. So it's not like I can choose different tracks, different companies. I know you have different train companies, but essentially it's a monopoly, which means that they can basically charge what they want in terms of getting around.
Yeah. And in a world where we are, as you're saying, trying to tackle climate change, setting aside even challenging poverty here, in a world where we're trying to achieve net zero, it's so counterproductive to be raising the prices of access to public transport. I mean, how can anyone be encouraged to use it if it's unaffordable to them? So, yeah, really need to be encouraging people to. We need publicly owned transport companies. Yeah.
And the other thing about the other aspect of what I was talking about, so I was talking about like warm homes and retrofitting, and I've talked about public ownership of transport. Is the other side of that is that it's really good for the economy. So if we really need to improve our public transport system, we need to improve the way our homes, the energy efficient of our homes. So what comes with that is it requires major infrastructure investment, which basically means it creates loads of jobs. So like we're in Aberdeen, and as most listeners probably will know, Aberdeen, obviously the last 50 years, Aberdeen is, in terms of the economy, has been heavily reliant on the oil and gas industry, and there's a lot of people who work in the oil and gas industry at the moment. There's lots of fears around like jobs and livelihoods, and so with essentially oil and gas sort of running out in the North Sea, and then you've got this issue of the issue of climate change, which means we can't continue burning oil and gas. That then I can imagine like a lot of people very fearful about the future because they might feel that they might not have a job. But the alternative to all that is what I've just described. Like, I believe there will be, if we get it right, and if there's the leadership and people demand it, there should not be a shortage of jobs, because we're going to have to transform everything in our cities and towns and villages, from our streets to our houses to the way we move people around, the way we generate electricity, particularly like through renewables. So there should not be a shortage of jobs if we are really serious and about it, addressing poverty, addressing climate change. So yeah, but it ultimately needs that leadership, and that leadership has to come from, it really needs more and more people demanding this is the direction that we go. And there's obviously lots of ways people can get involved in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, I don't know if you would say that it seems to be a case of that people who are maybe contributing to the problem the least are being the hardest hit. But a lot of people might say, well, I'm really not the problem here. There's major industries and stuff. Why is it just me, little old me, that has to step up and take the brunt of this? But I think you've done a really great job in explaining a lot of the reasons why it falls to us to step up and hold people to account and make change. But how would you say that this links to a theme of the just transition? Like, what else can we do?
Yeah, so the term just transition is it can be people may have heard it, or it's getting increasingly used, but the way we would describe it and the way I would describe it is what it really means is about it. So it's just transition. So it's two bits of it. So just talk about the transition bit. So basically that recognizes that we have to basically move away from fossil fuels because it's causing the climate crisis, and so we need to move into a different system, and so that's the transition bit. So essentially we need to move from fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas, to more renewable ways of generating energy, and that includes obviously generating electricity, and also we need to basically make our homes and cities more energy efficient. So that's the aspect of it. But what that will require is that in itself is potentially very disruptive, because we our whole economy at the moment, or has been based on fossil fuels. So shifting that that things would have to change. So that's the transition bit, and because of that, it has to really be just. So essentially what we would say that means is that the people who will be most affected by that change, and that is actually fossil fuel workers, so that could be offshore workers, and also the communities which are in areas which is heavily reliant on fossil fuels, like a place like Aberdeen, that those people not only directly benefit from the change, so it might be that their homes get more warm, affordable, drier, but most importantly, those people have to be part of the decision making what happens, like directly part. It's not just our consultation, but they need to be central to that. And so that's what we would say what a just transition has to be. But currently, the energy transition is not, what we would argue is currently is not going, is essentially not going fast enough to minimise our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but also it's essentially being controlled by the boardrooms of lots of energy companies and private companies, which again their role is about making profit, not addressing climate change. And so, and then also in terms of the government policy, is at the moment is not ambitious enough to address, one, the underlying causes of climate change in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also policy which then incentivizes people, puts incentives so we can make that transition and put in resources and money into all the things that I've already talked about in terms of transport and houses and things like that. And then the other thing about a just transition bit is like when we're talking about houses, so I talked about like when we think about warm homes, it's like you feel like it's like a physical, it will be a direct physical benefit. So there's lots of evidence to show that if people who live in like poorly heated, drafty, damp homes, they suffer a lot more from ill health than people in drier homes, or and so you got so having like the sort of mass retrofit not only will bring fuel bills down, but actually would actually help make people a lot healthier, which then also obviously reduces the burden and the costs on something like the NHS as well. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Like that's where we need to be going.
Yeah, definitely. And what work are Friends of the Earth doing specifically to will have an impact on individuals and communities here in Scotland when it comes to the themes that we've been discussing today?
Yeah, so for a long time we've campaigned on transport. So we've done a lot on public ownership of transport for the reasons I've already said. Also, we've done a lot of we traditionally the way we've worked is that we will gather the evidence to say this is what you should be doing, government, and so we would build a campaign around that where then people maybe can support it, and then we will sort of essentially present that to the Scottish government. But what we're doing more now, or we're moving towards, is we're a member-led organisation, so we want people to basically get directly involved with Friends of the Earth Scotland and be part of a wider, broader, like progressive movement in Scotland, where it's actually there's a mass amount of people demanding the change and being very loud, being very vocal, and actually also creating the change themselves. So we've not talked about it, but there's lots of examples of like community projects which have their own energy generating things. So there's one in just down the road in Tillydrome with Donside Hydro.
Yeah.
So there's so we need to have more of, so it's do stuff ourselves, and that could also be like community scale retrofit as well. So it could be whole communities coming together to basically plan and implement like a community scale retrofit. And obviously for that to happen, that needs resources, it needs money. And so therefore that it comes back to the demand on government as well to put the resources into those sorts of schemes, and not, which currently is happening in the UK, we continue to subsidise private energy companies, we subsidise private bus companies as well. And so we need to move those resources towards where they're really required in our communities.
Brilliant. And it's a massive task to make sure that all those voices are recognised when we're making these demands. How do you even begin to think about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's partly why organisations like Friends of the Earth Scotland exist, is because it can be I mean, yeah, I've talked about a lot of things, and it can be, I can imagine some listeners might be quite overwhelming. It can feel quite overwhelming. And so I think the one thing I would say is, and that there's lots of organisations out there, and I'm sure there's lots of organisations on the Challenge Poverty Week website that have a look, and if there's anything that I think you have to do it collectively. So I think you can do your own little bit in your own house, in your own home, and I would encourage people to do that sort of thing, like recycle more and try to use energy efficient light bulbs and all that sort of stuff. But for me, that's like the drop in the ocean bit. What has to happen is we need to get together with people in our communities, people in our, whether it's in a tenement, and think about what needs to happen. And then there's lots of organisations out there like Friends of the Earth Scotland, which you can be a member of, and then we would campaign together to basically to demand and not just ourselves, but we've worked with lots of other organisations in Scotland. We've worked with trade unions as well to demand that basically all the things I've listed that they come about.
Well, that sounds brilliant, Scott. Thank you so much for coming along and chatting to us. So if someone wanted to be a member of Friends of the Earth Scotland, where do they go? What do they have to do?
So if you go onto our website, so I would just put Friends of the Earth Scotland in your favourite search engine, and you will come up to our website, and on there it's quite straightforward in terms of how you can support or become a member. And yeah, so that like I say, we're really having a big focus on trying to get more members, and it's not just about members, because we're a charity, and so obviously we do need like donations. So it's not just about, it's about actually getting members and then having it a way that members can get directly involved in demanding and campaigning for the sort of things that we've talked about. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And make sure to go and check them out, and any other organisations that Scott has mentioned today. Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure chatting to you, and hopefully I'm sure you'll come back and chat to us somewhere, or you could check out Scott's own show. Thank you very much for listening today. If you haven't caught the rest of our Challenge Poverty Week coverage, make sure you go back and have a listen. We've had lots of fantastic people come in to chat to us. They're all definitely worth a listen, and you'll gain a lot of really good insight into the different things that we can be doing to help tackle poverty. If you would like to get involved in Challenge Poverty Week further, why not check out the Poverty Alliance's website or search the hashtags on social media. So those hashtags are Challenge Poverty or We Demand Better. Don't be shy, get involved too, and make sure you keep an eye out for all of our coverage here at shmu. Now, demanding better for Scotland doesn't stop when Challenge Poverty Week ends, as we have talked about plenty today, but there's lots of other things that you could do as well. We must continue to challenge and ask for better. So the Poverty Alliance are leading a Scotland Demands Better march in Edinburgh on the 25th of March to demand better for us all. You can find out more about this if you'd like to get involved by visiting scotland-demands-better.com. I've been Rose. Thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you once again, Scott, for coming in, and I shall see you next time.